Welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where every week we enter the world of a classic film, explore its ideas, the filmmaking, its history, and the influence it's had on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, I'm John Roca. I'm an actor, voiceover artist, and host of shows and podcasts like this here in Los Angeles.
And today we're going to do something that's maybe a little bit different. You know, when we started recording the Cine-Files just a few weeks ago, and we wanted to get a few shows in the can to get practiced and to be ready for when we're launching. It's actually launching just a few days from now.
Yeah.
And then something happened a few days ago that made us want to do a film right away, and that is the passing of Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
He's a very big person in my life. I know he was in yours.
Yeah.
And that's led us to do, which is certainly a great film, and our first documentary, which is When We Were Kings, 1996.
Yeah.
Fantastic film.
Absolutely.
Tell me, John, what's your relationship with Muhammad Ali?
Well, to me, it began, as most things do in my life with film. It was my dad, and my dad was a huge boxing fan, like massive boxing fan. And as people who've listened to the podcast or who've heard me on other shows, my father was Bolivian, came to this country. So for him, for whatever reason, sports was a way of connecting into the American culture, understanding the American culture, learning how to speak the language off broadcasts like that. So seeing Muhammad Ali at a young age, I was like 7 or 8 the first time I saw him, and they would rebroadcast, and people don't remember this who are of a certain age, but they would rebroadcast the great fights that Ali would have, you know, as fillers, or they do special shows profiling Ali, and you'd watch the Frazier fight or the Foreman fight or Ken Norton, Leon Spinks. The first actual fight I remember watching live was the Larry Holmes fight, unfortunately. So you watch the destruction of this man. And I remember crying because I'd become such a fan of his through the old fights. To see it live and to see him beaten like that was just so powerful for me. But then as you get older, you start to, you investigate the man's life and see what he did. And it was always fascinating. And my dad and I always had that between us to talk about Ali and all that he did and what he stood for. And in fact, I took my dad to see When We Were Kings the opening weekend in DC. We drove all the way down to I think it's DuPont Circle, one of the theaters down there. And we watched When We Were Kings because I wanted to share that with my dad because at the time, I think I was 22, 24 when this came out. And I thought it was something great to share with my dad because of our love of Ali growing up.
What was his reaction?
He absolutely loved the film. He thought it was such a great exploration of what was going on behind the scenes. And a lot of us didn't know that, right? A lot of us probably wouldn't have known what was going on behind the scenes if we weren't of a certain age reading the newspapers, right? And so to watch the film, he really enjoyed how deep they went into the mythology of Ali, but also how deep they went into the human frailties, the vulnerabilities, the questions, the things he had in his mind about whether he was going to be able to beat George Foreman or not.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like as a big Ali fan too, I've watched. There's so many documentaries. There's so many profiles of him, and they all seem to fall short of the man. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a sense when you're watching them that you're getting this glimpse, this shadow of this person that is bigger than the films that he's in.
Yeah.
And I think When We Were Kings is the only one that doesn't feel that way.
Agreed.
It feels like it captures at least to some degree the essence of this person. It's funny. I think for people who are younger, they don't understand how important boxing was because it isn't anymore. Like boxing has fallen on hard times a bit. It's under competition from UFC, and the world has changed. But at the time when we were younger, and certainly before us, the heavyweight champion of the world was the most important athlete in the world.
Yes.
And that was it.
Yes.
And there was this, this succession of people that held this title.
Yeah.
And that title was important.
Yeah.
In a way that it's not important now. Mm-hmm. And I, growing up in the 70s, Muhammad Ali was just this name.
Yeah.
He was this important person. Mm-hmm. And so even before I knew who he was or anything about him, I knew that this person was important.
Yeah.
In a way that, Joe Frazier, or in a way that Larry Holmes or whoever was not important.
Yeah.
That Ali seemed to so here's the most important sports title in the world at the time. Mm-hmm. And here's this person that transcended the most important sports title. And I'll tell you, my first real knowledge of him comes from a strange place, which is the Superman versus Muhammad Ali comic book by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, which is, okay, it's dated and silly.
Well, of course.
But it's still great in its way. And that's where I first heard the term the rope-a-dope. And that's where I first saw this person spewing poetry. I'm like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And you had seen him around. And like you, the first live fight I probably saw was the Larry Holmes fight. And it was just, here's this big kind of lumbering, slow guy.
Yeah.
And then as I started to go back and see the early films and you see this sparkling, bright, fast person, that's when the fascination started.
Yeah, I think that's what is the appeal to Ali is the entire encapsulation of his life. You can see yourself in the young, cocky kid who wants to shock the world, right? And then right afterwards, he converts to being a Muslim. Like that's what's so amazing about Ali is the stances he makes, the decisions he makes for a person who is at a position at that level. He took such chances with his popularity, such chances with his fame, but he was always able to back it up. And there was a personality, a charm to him that you can't quantify in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's why people loved following his story. And he was able to do the things that he did because he had such conviction to it that was unwavering. And when you're forming yourself as a human being, those are the people that you kind of respect or honor or want to be like, because you're like, I want to be that strong when I'm tested. I want to be that strong when I get knocked down, when I come out of jail and I think I'm going to take the championship and I get knocked down by Joe Frazier. I want to have the strength to get back up and go at him again, in the next fight. And I think that's what's so amazing about Ali. It's not just the wins. It's not just the things he stood for. It's the way he kept getting back up and like just establishing himself and shocking people. He was constantly shocking the world through his entire life. And I think that's very rare people, let alone athletes, do that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think in a way, so we talked about, in a way, I'd say Ali is one of those great unknowable characters of history where he's so public and so fascinating. And in the end, there's something that I'm never going to know. I don't get to know.
Right.
And I would put him with, we already talked about him in a previous podcast, which hasn't come out yet, but with Orson Welles.
Yeah.
Where there's this person who the more you know about that person, the more you want to know about them.
Yeah.
And that they're endlessly fascinating and sometimes frustrating.
Yes.
And contradictory and complex.
Yes.
And it's interesting too, you say because at the beginning of Ali, in the early years, it was this man who was untouchable.
Yes.
He was so fast.
So quick.
And so graceful, and seemed to be in these fights with these really strong opponents like Sonny Liston, where he didn't seem to be stressed.
Yeah.
It was like he was dancing around. And then they transition that to the later fights where it's about him taking the punishment. And if you had said the big criticism, one of the big criticisms, and there are a lot of criticisms of him in the early days, was that, he probably can't take a punch.
Yeah.
Apparently that's not true.
No.
He took a lot of punches and probably far too many. It's hard to separate talking about this film and talking about the man. So the film is about the rumble in the jungle, arguably Ali's most famous fight.
Yes.
Against George Foreman in Zaire. And which had been the Congo.
Yeah.
And it is a fight. What's interesting about both the fight and the film is that it seems to bring together this moment in history of all of these cultural influences coming together at this time and at this place, a very unusual place. And the film captures that in quite a remarkable way.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, Steve. The Black power, the African Americans were embracing their power in society across the world. And you were seeing that in their music. You were seeing that in sports. You were seeing that in the pop culture. You were seeing that more and more. And the 70s was really where what had been bubbling to the surface from the 50s and 60s, where you had Malcolm X, you had Martin Luther King, you had Eldridge Cleaver, you had the Black Panthers. All of this is an expression of a desire to find a place, to find strength in a society, and to be proud of their race and their color. And the movie really captures that that because the whole central point was them going back to Africa, to the motherland, to put this spectacle on in a place where they are, that is the origin of their race, right? And I think that's the power of the movie. Always in every scene, you're seeing the power of that over everything else that's happening.
And the relationship between the African American who's had their experience,
right,
to the native person from Africa,
right,
and how there's, this is a family that's been ripped apart, and now you're looking at the brothers and sisters coming together, in experiencing each other in this new way.
Yeah,
flying over the Sahara Desert on an African airline with all African stewardess, all African pilots. Boy, it's the first free feeling I ever had in a long time. Ain't there something flying in an airplane with all black pilots, all black crew? Amazing. This is strange to the American Negro. We never dreamed of this. And every time we watch television, they show us Tarzan and the natives and the jungles. They never told us that the Africans were more intelligent than we are. They speak English. They speak English, French, and African. We can't even speak English good.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the way the movie frames it, how Ali gains strength from that.
Yeah,
almost like he's a wizard, a mystic who's pulling strength from the land that he's in and the people that he's with,
right,
that he's going to use to take on this, god of a man, George Foreman.
Right.
Ali, Boombaye, Ali, Boombaye, Ali, Boombaye, Ali, Boombaye. That mean kill him.
One of the most chilling things, Steve, in that movie is watching the old footage of Foreman destroying Frazier, of Foreman destroying Ken Norton.
Terrifying.
It is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Yeah. You really get what this man, who was, you could arguably coming to the end of his powers as a boxer, was going up against, in essence, another version of Sonny Liston later in his life to possibly shock the world again.
And even scarier than Liston.
Yes.
So for those of you who are not boxing fans,
right.
Let's give you a little bit of. There's a lot, and obviously, John and I have watched these things a lot.
Yeah.
Is that so? Let's see how to go about explaining some of this. So Ali gets the gold medal at the Olympics in 1960.
Yes.
And that's in Rome.
Yeah.
And he thought at that moment that he had conquered the world. And he comes home to his hometown, which is Louisville, Kentucky, sits down at a lunch counter wearing his gold medal because he wore it everywhere he went.
Yeah.
And, he's a 19-year-old kid, I think, at this point. And they say, we won't serve you here. And it's at that moment that he realizes that this thing that he's accomplished means nothing.
Yeah.
And that he still is the way that America sees him. And he takes his gold medal and throws it in the river. So just starting with this, who this person is. And you can imagine the gold medal of the Olympics, and he throws it away. And that frames, in a lot of ways, who he's going to be.
Yes.
And he's this young up-and-coming boxer, and that won't stop talking. And we should say something else too, which is that there is in the history of African American sports, there's sort of a tension between what I would say is Jack Johnson and
Joe Louis.
Yes, or broke the color barrier and
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson.
Yes.
So and this tension is between, do you stay quiet?
Yeah.
And do you take it and be respectful and try to get along with everybody, or do you be yourself?
Right.
And this comes all the way back to Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. Like this argument of what is the role of the African American, or at the time called the Negro, in American society.
Yeah.
And if you look at Jack Johnson was first African American heavyweight champion of the world in the teens.
Yeah, 1900s, early
1900s and early teens. And he was this unstoppable person. And if you're interested in him, and I highly recommend watching the Unforgivable Blackness, which is the documentary from Ken Burns.
Such a good documentary.
Fantastic documentary about Jack Johnson. And he was going to be himself. He was arrogant. He was showy. He married a white woman. He carried a gold cane. He dressed in these beautiful suits. And he was going to be who he was going to be. And America hated it.
Yes.
and destroyed him in all sorts of ways. Yeah. And you don't get another African-American heavyweight champion until Joe Louis. And Joe Louis is very much in the mold of Jackie Robinson, which is, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to get along, I'm going to be grateful for what I have, and I'm not going to mess it up.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the model until you get to Muhammad Ali, who's then named Cassius Clay, and he wasn't going to be that at all. He was going to be in the Jack Johnson mold. He spouted poetry. He was arrogant. Yeah. He was, honestly, at that era, particularly around the Liston fight, seemed crazy. You know, he was just this huge personality, and America wanted to shut that guy up. And it's interesting the way that Liston fight was framed was that they treated Liston as the hope, as the good Negro, one would say at that time.
Even though he had a lot of ties to
mobs and criminals.
Right? Exactly.
And yet they treated him as the guy that was going to shut down this loud mouth. They called him the Louisville Lip.
Yeah.
And of course, the opposite happens. Ali takes out Liston in a way that was shocking to the world. And what's the thing he does the next day?
He converts to Muslim.
Yeah, well, he'd already converted, but he
announced that he's converted.
He had converted a while ago,
right? Yes,
and he changed his name to Muhammad Ali from Cassius Clay. Yeah. And for years, the mainstream media would not call him that,
and not just the mainstream media, other boxers, in order to get under his skin. And I remember one of the famous stories of Floyd Patterson. Muhammad Ali fights Floyd Patterson. Patterson in the media said, "I will never call him Muhammad. His mom and dad had called him Cassius. That's what I'm going to call him." So the rumor is throughout the fight, Ali, every time he just landed these amazingly hard punches because he knew he was a better boxer than Patterson at the time, who was at the tail end of his career, said, "What's my name?" every time he punched him. And the rumor is that he kept him. He kept the fight going longer than it should have because he wanted to punish him for doing that.
Yeah,
and there's the thing we talked about earlier, Steve, when you talked about he has the complexities of this character of Ali.
Yeah. Is there something vicious?
Yeah.
I mean, part of what's hard with Ali is that he, more than any athlete I know of, is playing psychological games.
Yes.
Is that he is messing with his opponents. Is that the way he talks about people, particularly like the way he talked about Sonny Liston, the way he talked about Patterson, the way he talked about Joe Frazier, and you see the way he talks about Foreman in this film, is insulting and messing with them. Yeah. And to the point where Liston was scared of him, from what I've read, is that Liston thought the guy was crazy.
He thought he was legitimately crazy.
Legitimately nuts.
Right.
And that's part of the game that Ali is playing. And we don't get to know when it's a game.
Yeah.
You know, a part of it's really fun. One of my favorite Ali lines is he's being interviewed by somebody before the Liston fight. Yeah. And the reporter interrupts Ali, which you have to do all the time because he just won't stop talking. And he says, "So I just saw Sonny Liston," and Ali interrupts immediately and says, "Ain't he ugly?" He's so funny. Ali he's such a funny person, such a great sense of humor. Anyway, so to continue the Ali story, we got to get to he becomes the champion of the world, and he is untouchable.
Yep.
One of the he barely gets hit. He's so good. And then in 66, 67,
sounds about right.
He gets inducted into or is supposed to be inducted into the Army.
Yeah.
Gets drafted. Which is that a conspiracy of the government to shut this guy up? What do you think?
I feel so. Yeah, I absolutely think so. Listen, I know we want to talk about how great America is, but just like Ali, America has this complex history with race, complex history with how it treats its citizens that speak out too much against it, because the government at that time wanted to really be this very powerful force. And you saw in the 60s, there was a lot of rebellion against the government at that time. And so I think what they were trying to do was to shut Ali up, to show that they could domesticate him, they could tame this what they saw as this wild animal who was able to say whatever he wanted. You have these movements going on in the 60s. He is a central figure of those movements along with Jim Brown, and so they try to draft Ali, in my opinion, to show a lesson to other black people in the country that even your proud champion who's boasting, we can tame him, we can control him. It's a predominantly white government. Why wouldn't it do that if it sees something as a threat?
And in particular, you have to talk about the Nation of Islam, which mainstream America was very uncomfortable with.
Yes, very much so.
Extremely uncomfortable with, in a way that is very different from the nonviolent movement from Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Like, because this was essentially a separatist movement. Mm-hmm. It's a movement that didn't support violence, but believed in violence and self-defense.
Yes.
And it said pretty nasty things about America, most of which are deserved.
Right. Yeah, some of them.
And okay, some of them. And so here's this guy who has unlimited attention from the media, and he's saying what he's saying, and then he gets drafted.
Yeah.
And then he does a remarkable thing, which is he refuses to be inducted.
Yeah.
He becomes essentially a conscientious objector. And even though, what everyone said, like when Joe Louis was in the Army, he just did exhibition fights.
Yeah.
It's not like the odds were they weren't going to send, when Elvis was in the Army, it's not like they're going to send Ali to war.
No.
But he said it doesn't matter. And his quote, which I will not quote because it contains a word that I will not say,
right.
But he says, the Viet Cong never called me the N-word.
Right.
And that's a profound statement. That's saying that I, as an individual, do not believe in this war. Martin Luther King had just come out against the war right at the same moment and said that this is wrong. And Ali says, I'm not going to fight that war. That's wrong. It's against my religion. I'm standing my convictions. I'm ready to go to jail.
He said, my war is here, not over there. Because he knew he was fighting for his people, for the soul of his people here in the States. And it speaks to Ali, always a statesman, and we haven't even talked we should finish it. Go ahead. Anyway, he tries to.
And to me, by the way, this is the moment where Ali transcends sports.
Yes.
This is the moment where he becomes something more. He's stripped of his title. He's stripped of his career. He is sentenced to prison. He eventually, the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and by the time the Supreme Court says no, you can't do that, and it's 3+ years later, and he's lost probably the 3 greatest years of his athletic life.
Right.
3 years without a fight is unheard of in boxing.
Yeah.
And then we get to the comeback story of him, and this is why we need to talk about this before we talked about Foreman destroying Frazier, because the person who's become the champion of the world is Joe Frazier, who's a very tenacious fighter. And there's a thing that people say that in order to see someone's greatness, they need to exist in a time where they have great competition.
Yes.
And that that there are eras where that really wasn't true in boxing or in other sports, and this is an era where it is, because you have Joe Frazier, who's an unbelievable, tenacious, skilled fighter with a great left hand, and Ali comes back as his second fight or third fight.
It was his first fight.
No, he has one warm-up.
He has one warm-up fight before? So maybe second fight then. Okay.
Maybe second fight. And Frazier beats him.
Yes.
Knocks him down.
14th round.
Yeah, gives him a horrible hard time. Did he break his jaw? No.
No, that was Ken Norton.
Ken Norton breaks his jaw. And you go like, oh, Ali's human. And then they have a second fight.
Yes.
And again, it goes 15 rounds, and Ali wins the second fight.
Right.
But at that point, Frazier's no longer the champ because Foreman has destroyed Frazier in 3 rounds. And if you ever want just to see a brutal beating, you watch what George Foreman does to Joe Frazier.
The 2 things I remember from that fight that still, whenever I see highlights, scare the hell out of me is when Foreman's about to land the knockout blow, and he hits him so hard that he literally makes Joe Frazier skip in the air and then just delivers the final blow that knocks him out. And you're just like, this is what he's turned his Joe Frazier's body into a puppet, and he's able to move it without strings, just with punches. And it scares the hell out of you because you see the force of this man.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! The heavyweight champion is taking the mandatory 8 count, and Foreman is as poised as can be.
It's terrifying, and now we can get back. Now we're in we get to the movie again.
Yes.
So this is the setup of the movie, which they do really beautifully in the credit sequence.
Yes.
They kind of go through a lot of this information, and we get to the framing of the movie as this old guy who's very charismatic, who's about to fight the monster.
Yeah.
The
old lion.
Yeah.
Who's coming back to try to take control of the pride again. And you have a young lion who's already in control.
Yeah. And is like nothing he ever faced, even as a young man. And this is, we should say this about documentaries, is that, and maybe this is a longer conversation, but people have the impression that documentaries are the truth.
Please, Steve, speak to this.
And so I've made a few documentaries, and documentaries are not the truth. Like if you watch Ali, the biopic with Will Smith,
Michael Mann film, yeah.
Michael Mann film, which I don't love.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I wanted to love it.
Sure.
But I don't. But you know you're watching a movie. You know that's not Ali. You know this is a movie. You know they've made choices about, they've combined characters. You know all that going in. Right. When you watch a documentary, you have the perception that what you are seeing is true because it's the real people. It really happened. And what you don't know about documentaries is that documentaries have greater power to lie to you than really any other medium.
Yeah.
Because you take real footage and you juxtapose it with other footage, and that creates impressions within people. You edit the film so that you're not seeing, they probably, for this 90-minute movie, they probably shot 100, 200 hours of footage.
Yeah.
Easily. Some documentaries could have thousands of hours of footage.
Yeah.
And they're just showing you this stuff. You don't know what you're not seeing. And even within lines, they're editing lines. That's something you do. For instance, if I had a line, I'm doing an interview with someone, and in the interview, the interviewee said, "Oh, well, Muhammad Ali, I mean, back at this time, he was remarkable. His speed was amazing." And I would take that line as an editor, and I would take out all the parts that don't work. And I would say, "Oh, Muhammad Ali his speed was amazing." Even then, I just stuttered more than I would let be in the documentary.
Right.
Sometimes you'll take two lines that are different and juxtapose them. You put them together to create one new sentence.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll take two lines that were recorded years apart and put them together as one sentence.
Yeah.
And then you put them next to something else, and suddenly you've created something that had never existed in reality but seems real.
Right.
And for me, what I always do editing a documentary, I will always send the documentary to everybody that was in it so that they can, because I feel my job is to make them say the best version of what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
And I want them to say, yeah, I sound great.
Yeah.
But I could do the opposite. I could make someone sound terrible.
Right.
I could make them sound foolish.
Yeah.
I could make them sound stupid. I could make them be insulting. Tremendous power in a documentary.
Yeah.
And this movie does a really brilliant job of framing this story at this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right, Steve. What you see is a very pro-Ali movie.
Yeah.
Right? There's no real exploration of what was going on for Foreman behind the scenes, what he was dealing with, why he was having the problems he was having in the situation and being in Africa, why he was so aloof, what were the personal trials and tribulations he was going with, becoming famous, becoming the champion, all the responsibilities that came with that. As a young man, how was he dealing with that? We don't know. We don't go behind the scenes with Foreman too much. He's in the film. There's a couple of press conferences, and especially with his former manager, there's a couple of solo interviews, but those are all at the time. There are no like retrospective interviews with Foreman or with the former manager for this movie. So you're only getting a snippet of what Foreman might have been going through. And when you find out that after this loss, he goes through 2 years of the deepest depression, then you understand there was a lot going on with him that is not shown in the movie. So it's a very pro-Ali movie. So what you're saying is edited to look that way, and it still may be the truth, but it's still...
Well, it is a truth.
It is a truth, right.
Well, and this is the thing, is that sometimes you're trying to find the truth with a capital T, but sometimes to get there, you're ignoring some of the truth with the little t.
Yes, exactly.
You're trying to get to a big truth.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, there's no George Foreman interview in the film.
No, that's what I'm saying.
It's not like he wasn't around.
In fact, he refused to do it, I think.
Well, he refused to do it?
Mm-hmm. They asked him, and he didn't want to talk about it.
It's interesting because I've seen Foreman interviewed about this fight lots of times.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, in 1990, the movie came out in 96, right?
I think it's 94.
94?
Yeah, I think, but maybe 96. Go ahead.
At that time, Foreman has had this huge resurgence.
Yes.
So he came back in the late 80s as this over-the-hill, really fat boxer who everyone laughed about, and then became
96. Yes,
became the world champion again, which is remarkable.
Yes,
and had the George Foreman grill. And what is the perception of George Foreman in the mid 90s?
Yeah, he's a very personable, funny,
lovable,
religious, very connectable personality.
And so, if you had interviews with that guy in this movie, it would have fucked up the movie.
That's a good point.
I really think it would have messed up because if you saw this likable, smiling guy,
right,
and then you would destroy the image of this unstoppable,
that's a good point,
powerful force of nature that Ali has to deal with,
right? Because
he would just be this smiling. Oh, I like this George.
Yes,
I like George.
Right, and you'd feel more sympathy for George Foreman in the film than you would for Ali.
Right.
Because you'd have Foreman's, whatever Foreman was going through.
Right.
He would be able to frame it in a way that you'd be more sympathetic. But now you create this narrative in the story that he is this unbeatable, unstoppable beast of a man, and you have Ali who everyone he thinks he's going to get beat. I mean, Howard Cosell, everyone. And they did such a great job, which we haven't touched on yet, we should, of having Norman Mailer and George Plimpton in the film to talk to two of the top minds to have ever walked this planet in this country, talk about boxing, about following Ali.
Yeah, Norman Mailer in particular is so good.
Yes.
And he frames the film.
Yeah.
Because at the very beginning of the film, and Norman Mailer is, both him and Plimpton are great, both sports writers and writers about American culture, and managed to link sports and culture in a way that I don't think we do anymore.
Right.
I think it's different now. And Mailer, at the very beginning of the film, says Ali was scared.
Hell, I think Ali was scared. I think he was scared even then. And he knew he was going to be very scared as he got closer and closer to the fight. With his ego, he could keep telling himself that he would dominate Foreman, that he would beat him, that he would dance, that he would make a fool of him, that he would show him superior boxing, that Foreman would never lay a glove on him. But in fact, in his sleep or wherever his private moment came, he had to know that he had not done nearly as well against two fighters, particularly Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, whom Foreman had demolished.
And that Ali's bravado and bluster are methods of overcoming his own fear and convincing himself and doing this sort of mystical transubstantiation within his own soul of fear to courage. And there is no evidence of this anywhere in the movie.
No, there isn't.
Except that Mailer says it.
Yeah.
And he says it so well at the beginning of the film that you are thinking about it throughout the film, and that becomes the narrative that the film is structured on, I think.
Yeah.
You know, so that, and even when, and Mailer then has a description of the first round of the fight. He essentially narrates it.
Yeah.
And it is among the great descriptions I've ever heard of sports. And the emotion of it. And he talks about Ali in the corner after the first round with Foreman and summoning his courage and realizing that that the nightmare has arrived. And he's finally in this nightmare, and now is the time that he must overcome it. And Mailer's description is so great.
Ali went back to the corner. The nightmare he'd been awaiting in the ring had finally come to visit him. He was in the ring with a man he could not dominate, who was stronger than him, who was not afraid of him, who was going to try to knock him out, and who punched harder than Ali could punch. And this man was determined and unstoppable. And Ali had a look on his face that I'll never forget. It's the only time I ever saw fear in Ali's eyes. Ali looked as if he looked into himself and said, all right, this is the moment. This is what you've been waiting for. This is that hour. And do you have the guts? And he kind of nodded to himself like, you got to get it together, boy. You really got to get it together. And you are going to get it together. You will get it together. He nodded some more, looking as if he were looking into his the eyes of his maker. And then he turned to the crowd and he went, Ali Beaumelier. And 100,000 people all yelled back, Ali Beaumelier. And this huge reverberation of the crowd came back into the ring. And Ali picked it up almost as if, these are my people. This is what I'm here for. All right, the time has come. I'm going to find a way to master this man.
And we have no idea that any of those thoughts are what's in Ali's head at all.
Exactly.
Except that now they are, because now that movie has become the definitive story of this, you know?
Yeah, and it's so... I think what you're saying is right, Steve. We don't see it nowadays. We do at times with baseball, but nowadays it isn't. And I think that's the thing that appeals to a lot of writers. I think it's a man thing. It's very much primal in our natures to watch battle. It is something that we are taught, trained, maybe instinctively know or understand. And so when the greatest fighters exist, when the greatest stable of fighters are there to fight each other, the best writers will gravitate to it naturally and will want to write about it. Not just sports writers, culture writers, writers of society, writers of the world want to come and watch this spectacle because they understand it at deeper levels than people who are just your local yokel watching it at the bar. Like there's more going on for them. And so they can frame it and look at it in a certain way. And you're right. They manipulate the framing by their own perception of what they think is happening.
Right.
You know, Ali could have just very well, instead of, because he said Ali starts going, Ali Boumaier, Ali could have just been like, okay, I've got to like psych myself up. I got to do this. Or what do I got to hit him with? I got to figure that. Okay. Oh yeah, I got to get the crowd going. It could have been that simple. You know. So you don't know.
Well, and it's funny. You remind me of in terms of the writers is the great moment in The Natural, which is a movie I love.
Yeah.
And Robert Redford, the great baseball player, is talking to Robert Duvall, the reporter, and says, "Did you ever play the game?" to Robert Duvall's character, and Duvall says, "Nope. But I make a lot more fun to watch." And I think that's what Mailer has done.
Yeah.
Is that, and what's interesting too, at this moment in time, at this place, there's a convergence between the sport of boxing and the culture in a way that I don't know has ever happened at another time.
Yeah.
There's so many things coming together, and the documentary does a beautiful job of the music, for instance, James Brown and B.B. King, and it's just like there's this unbelievable soundtrack from this concert that they did before the fight. That's amazing.
It's a 3-day concert.
Yeah.
And all these bands were coming from all over the world. All these, you can say, I guess, black bands, African American bands, artists were all coming to take part in this to celebrate the culture.
By the way, it's just occurred to me, and and I'm sure that some scholars could totally tell me why I'm wrong.
Sure.
But it occurs to me that the term African American, which is a term that didn't exist at the time,
No, it didn't.
might have come from this.
Oh, maybe.
And I don't know this, so please don't take this as anything.
Right.
But if you were to say someone was African American in 1973, 1974, they would get mad.
Yes.
I mean, and today, and you go like, there's this moment of connection between the African Americans and the continent of Africa that happens in this time.
Right.
That's something sort of remarkable happened.
Well, you look at the organization, Steve, right? The Black Panthers, the National Association of Colored People. Like they're embracing terms that have been given to them. The United Negro College Fund is the first time I remember hearing Negro being used in any organization. And so now African American, yes, this is the PC way to look at it, right? Of course. But some African Americans, like my friend Andre, he's Jamaican, and people call him African American all the time. He's like, I'm not African American. My parents are Jamaican. So I am not in that stable. And so it's like they don't identify 100% with that story. You have to be accurate when you're doing that, So it's interesting to watch those moments when they happen.
And this is one of my concerns with doing this podcast is we've got a white Jewish guy and a Bolivian Latino guy talking about the most critical issues in the history of African American life.
Well, okay.
So, and I hope we're doing okay.
Yes, I hope we're doing it justice.
I hope we're doing it respectfully, which is what we try to do.
Yeah. But also because we're both socially conscious people, and so for us, I think
we think we are.
Yes, I believe we are.
I'm sure when this goes out in the world, there might be people who think that we're not.
Yes, but not deep enough, not deep conscious enough. Yeah. Well, race has been a very big deal to me my entire life, and I think if anyone's listening to me on my podcast or on my shows, I do make it a central point of stuff I look at, and it's because I think it's important. But I don't make it the prevalent number one thing. But I think it is important in my life, and I think for you, you've been very aware. I've read your posts and your posts, your political posts. You're very aware of that as well. So we're doing the best we can to give it the respect and justice it deserves and the analysis it deserves.
Well, and I think that a film like this, and in particular a character like Muhammad Ali, is what draws you in. It's what he is a character because he was so divisive, but also because he became so charismatic.
Yeah.
And the time that he came back, and when you hear the African people in this film talk about Muhammad Ali, it's his standing up against the war in Vietnam that makes them go, he's our guy.
Yeah.
Yes, We knew Muhammad Ali as a boxer, but more importantly, for his political stance. When we saw that America was at war in a third world country, Vietnam, and that one of the children of the United States said, "Me? You want me to go and fight against the Viet Cong? Why should I fight against them? They haven't done anything against me." And for us, it was extraordinary to see that in the America of that time, someone could take such a position. He may have lost his title, he may have lost millions of dollars, but that's where he gained the esteem of millions of Africans.
Because the people in Africa who had been subjugated and imperialized, colonized by the European powers, by the white powers, felt a kinship with Vietnam, which is also colonized by the French.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, this is us. And this is, Muhammad Ali is on our side.
Yeah.
And so their perception of him, not because he was a great boxer, although he was, but that he was a hero in the real sense of being a hero.
Yeah.
And you feel Ali, and again, this is Norman Mailer's framing of it, but suck up that power from this world that he's in.
Yeah. And Plimpton as well, exploring the other aspects of this situation here too, seeing the other side of the African culture with the succubus, with the witch doctor, with all these things that are like to him are mystical elements that exist in the African culture, bringing that in. Mailer approaching it from more of a philosophical approach, and you have Plimpton for more of the underbelly approach, which I like. It's a good exploration.
And it's interesting because I wanted to talk about the succubus too, because I think this is, again, a brilliant bit of documentary filmmaking.
Yes.
So Plimpton's the only person that still tells the story about the succubus.
Yes.
Now, maybe this thing really happened.
Sure.
Maybe other people knew about this story, but we don't know that. We only know that Plimpton said it.
Yeah.
And then, do you remember the very opening moment of the film?
Please go ahead.
It's the woman.
Okay.
It's the woman who's performing.
Yeah.
Who's singing, and there's the breathing. That's the opening moment
Of the film?
of the film. The whole film.
Oh, wow.
Is
Okay.
that
Oh, okay.
moment. And there's this really crazy shot where it's kind of a low angle shot as this African or African American woman, we don't know, kind of turns the camera as she's doing this breathing part, rhythmic breathing within this piece of music, and her eyes are kind of crazy and mystical in this shot. And then each time that a problem happens with Foreman, when he gets cut over the eye, when things are happening, we hear this same breathing and return to this shot.
That's a good
and
point.
then and particularly when Plimpton tells the succubus story, what do we hear? This music, the breathing, and we see that shot.
He had said that, the féticheur had said that a woman with trembling hands would somehow get to Foreman, a succubus. And that impressed me enormously.
Then there's the moment in the fight where Foreman starts to get tired, and Plimpton goes, "It's it, the succubus has him." And again, we return to the breathing in the shot.
Yeah.
Now, this is just some woman who was doing a show. You know what I mean? Like, she's not a succubus. She's a musical performer. But the editors found this shot, and they went, and you do this frequently when you're editing a film. You go, I don't know what it is, but there's something there.
Yeah.
And then they had this brilliant idea of let's link this weird breathing musical shot with the story of the succubus, and it becomes a through line with throughout the whole film.
Yeah.
Even though these things have nothing to do with each other.
That's a great point, because the succubus Plimpton is mentioning is not the succubus that's on stage singing.
That's just a
musician. That's a musician singing, it's doing an African song for whatever reason. It seems very like a song from the culture, right? And so you hear that.
We don't know.
Well,
we have no idea. That's what it feels like.
This is what it feels like to me. I'm pontificating, but it feels like to me. Yeah. But so, and it's powerful in that way. And you're right. The documentarians use it perfectly in the film to put you in that moment to believe that that's actually happening. In that moment, the Foreman has got, because Plimpton goes from the fix is in when Ali starts doing the rope-a-dope to the succubus grabbing Foreman and being the reason why Foreman's being lost, which in fact may not have anything to do with the situation. It may just be very simple technique that Ali noticed that Foreman was so powerful, and this is Mailer talks about this, that in the training camp, Ali had, with sparring partners, he would have them just beat him to the body, beat him up, so that he could see how much punishment he could withstand, because he had already developed in his mind what he's going to do before he got in that ring. And that's one of the things that I will always say about Ali. He always seemed to be smarter and at least 1 to 2 steps ahead of every opponent he ever faced. He just knew how to play the game correctly, and he knew how to defeat people. And he would get caught. He would lose, obviously, to Frazier, to Spinks, to Norton. Or not Norton, but Frazier to Spinks, and obviously Holmes later. But he would always find a way to come back, because he would always find a way to master it. And that's what Mailer mentions too. He goes, I'm going to master this man. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to master this man. And so when he goes to the rope-a-dope in the second or third round, everyone, of course, logically starts to be like, oh, he's old, he's tired, he's just holding on for dear life, without really understanding that this is a technique he had thought about. And so when Foreman is tiring for 3 or 4 rounds later, because Ali has built his body up to withstand the punishment, and he's skilled enough to avoid the uppercuts and the strong punches that are coming, he has the moment. He finds the moment in the 8th round. And it's amazing to watch. The last half hour of the film is the fight, the profile of the fight. Yeah. And
you're right. It is amazing. What's interesting, too, he repeatedly says, and everybody says over and over again, what are you going to do in the fight? I'm going to dance.
Yeah.
And Ali is known, particularly the young Ali, as being the greatest footwork dancer in the heavyweight.
Yeah.
Certainly of heavyweight there is.
Yeah.
And if you watch Ali's fight, he doesn't fight right for a boxer.
Right.
So he fights, particularly as a young man, he fights with his hands down. And if you've ever taken a boxing class, the most basic thing is keep your hands up. Keep your hands up, because that's what's going to protect you. Is that just if you got a hand up, then hopefully that jab can't get in. Ali, for the first half of his career, depends upon his speed.
Yeah.
And so he keeps his hands down. He wants them to throw a punch so he can step, slip, and counter.
Yeah.
And he punches from weird angles too. He doesn't punch from the normal, just a straight jab. He punches from the side. He punches from the, moving to the left or to the right. It's always a very different thing. So when he says, I'm going to dance, everyone goes, of course you are. That's what you have to do against a guy this big. Right. And again, it seems as if that was his whole strategy, was to get Foreman to think he was going to dance. And in fact, he's planning a completely different strategy.
Right.
But we don't know. We don't know when he decided to do the rope-a-dope. We don't know if he decided to do the rope-a-dope a year before or in the ring. We don't actually get to know. The movie seems to frame it as if this was his plan all along.
Right.
But man, the courage of going, here's one of the hardest hitters of all time, and I'm going to let this guy hit me. Now, if you watch, and if you like boxing, you will see a clinic of Ali deflecting and taking 30% of that punch.
Yeah.
A little bit off the elbow, and the rest goes into the body. He's moving to the opposite direction. His speed and agility is still there in the rope-a-dope. It's remarkable. But that's a scary strategy, because Foreman gets 2 in, and he does. He gets a lot more than 2 in solid.
Yeah.
And this is one of the hardest hitters in the world. I mean, how do you know you can come back?
That's the thing. And I think that's the thing that struck me watching it this time, because I think the for whatever reason the film can hit you at certain times, but to watch it this time, what I embraced about him was the confidence he had in himself that he could figure it out. Like, you have to have a belief in yourself. I think to achieve any true status in life and to maintain that status at a high level, you have to believe in yourself at some level. No matter what your insecurities are, what your demons are, what your fears are, you have to truly believe in yourself at some level as you're in your foundation. And I think in those moments when Foreman is getting those shots in, the fact that Ali is not knocked out, the fact that Ali is withstanding him, gives him even more belief. And I think from the beginning, he kind of embraced of his life as he started this social movement within himself, and then took part in a few of them in the 60s and in the 70s. You see him start to become a symbol for his people, and him embrace that. And in embracing that, I think that's what is there for him all the time, is this belief that he stands for more than just himself. And so it gives him that extra strength, it gives him that extra belief, that extra courage to withstand these punches and to believe that he can beat this man. I
think that's a great point, and it brings me back in a way to that moment of throwing away the Olympic medal.
Yeah.
Because the moment of throwing away the Olympic medal is he thought he had achieved a thing, and that this medal was the symbol of the thing, and now everything would be different.
Right.
Then what he actually does in his life is achieve that thing in his own way, by being who he is, by creating the mystique and the charismatic power of Muhammad Ali,
Yeah.
of this person,
Yeah.
of this persona, which might be him. I mean, I think it is him.
Right.
And I think it isn't him. I
Yeah.
think there's some other things underneath that we don't get to know about.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, when you think about, you turn the tables, you go, okay, I'm George Foreman. I'm 24 years old. I'm the world champion.
Yeah.
I destroyed Joe Frazier. And here's this old man, and he's standing right in front of me. He's not dancing.
Right.
And I'm loading up and hitting him with everything I have. And he's standing, and you know Ali's talking to Foreman.
Yes.
Ali's talking to him.
You can see in the movie, they
his
show
mouth
that.
is moving.
Yeah.
And what must be happening? Because, again, let's say this clearly. Foreman is a 24-year-old guy. Like, he is young and not that experienced in the world.
Right.
And here's this guy talking to him. Like, what's going through Foreman's head? How does that feel?
Yeah.
To have that taken away.
Yeah, when that's the thing. It's youth, isn't it? Like, you're cocky until the older person figures you out. You're cocky until the older person because the older person has technique, the older person has been where you're at, and the older person has been doing it longer. So he knows how to defeat you. He knows how to take advantage of your exuberance, your youthful cockiness, your youthful belief that you can do everything, and you have endless amounts of energy. Supposedly, you have endless amounts of endurance, and that's what comes back to bite Foreman in the ass in the 8th round, because he is exhausted.
Yeah.
And the documentary does such a great job of showing that, with Plimpton talking about in slow motion when Foreman gets hit, and you see the sweat just pour off Foreman's head, and the reason for that is because he is so tired from throwing all these big punches, and no one has ever stood that long in the ring with him at that level to withstand his punishment. So mentally, it starts to work on. He starts to question himself, and that's where Ali gets him. Ali's got him psychologically, and you brought that up earlier.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Stuff.
And one of the things you can say about Ali is he wasn't the hardest hitter of boxers, but he was a really precise hitter.
Yes.
And a really fast hitter. And he would hit people at the right moment, in just the right spot of their body. And the other thing too, and this is why I believe, and I think we talked about this before, that that boxing and baseball are the two greatest sports to make movies about. Is that, and the reason is that both of them come down to mano a mano on a certain level.
Yeah.
And both of them have dramatic builds and overcoming of things that can be very filmic. Like football, which I would rather watch football than baseball, is so complex and chaotic. It's hard to focus on the moment.
Right.
Whereas boxing, you're taking the punch, and then you have to have courage in this way. And Ali's display of courage and of it's undeniable.
Yeah.
Like you cannot watch him take those punches and watch him overcome that and watch him come back without seeing the physical manifestation of real courage.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's what boxing is cinematic within itself as a sport.
Yeah.
We've seen them, and if people remember Evander Holyfield and those Riddick Bowe trilogy with Evander Holyfield is one of the best boxing trilogies ever in the history of mankind. Once again, Riddick Bowe looked to be this overpowering young champion. Evander Holyfield looked to be out of his depth. And you see the way he fights back. You see them go back and forth and earn the respect within each other. You know.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one of the things that helps in this situation, real quick, Steve, is that George Foreman never fights another top fighter after he loses to Ali. It maintains that aura that Ali beat this man at the height of his powers, and no one else was it. I think he lost another fight after this, Foreman did, and then went into a deep depression and what have you, and never boxed again until he came back later in life and won the title. But Frazier never got to get his revenge. Norton never got to get his revenge. It was Ali that took him out, and there's a magic in that. You know.
Well, and again, it's all these unknowables.
Yes.
You know, there's the things like, well, we don't. So what would have happened if this had happened? And the fact you brought this up at the beginning, which I think is a great point. Part of the Ali story is about him losing.
Yes.
Is that if he hadn't lost to Frazier, if he hadn't had his jaw broken by Ken Norton, if he hadn't had those years, it's those missing years. It's all those what ifs that make him continually fascinating. And honestly, it's the decade after this fight where he continued to fight.
Yeah.
And he had said, there had been people who had said, win or lose, this is going to be his last fight.
It should have been, yeah.
And it should have been.
Yeah. Well, I think what Plimpton says is the tragedy of the movie. Plimpton says, I couldn't believe that this man is also a statesman. If Ali had stopped fighting after the Foreman fight, there's a very good chance he could have become a senator. He could have become possibly president. The man had such an aura, such a charm. And look at us now with Donald Trump. Someone like that is a nominee for the presidency. And you look and you see, well, Ali had so much more personality and charm and so much more grace and so much more ability to speak off the cuff. Why wouldn't he have had a shot to become a senator or president? Certainly possible, because he was very intelligent about social issues, very much on top of things, very much able to hold conversations on talk shows with men of intelligence and degree and pedigree. And there's a reason for that. The man was naturally intelligent.
Oh, he's a brilliant
He
man.
just chose to be a boxer. He was gifted to be a boxer.
Well, and he's also, from what I understand, I don't know, severely dyslexic, but he was dyslexic,
Yes.
and he like reading was not his strong suit.
Right.
And as a person, I'm a little dyslexic, and so I really feel you can see with Ali the difference between educational or book smarts and natural genius. And the guy's clearly a genius.
Yeah.
And so I think he overcompensated for areas that he maybe wasn't as strong in. I mean, that's why he was 4F for the Army in the first place.
Yes.
Because he couldn't read well.
Right.
It's so that, and having at that time undiagnosed, learning disability, and yet here's this brilliant guy, and a brilliant tactician and a strategist and a brilliant person in terms of public relations and public persona, and beautiful with words.
Yeah.
The poetry and his sense of humor is so great. Yeah, I agree. But it's also the lesson of the Rumble in the Jungle and the Rope-a-Dope is don't quit. I can overcome it.
Yeah.
And then he takes that lesson to the next fight, and the next fight, this is something you see all the time with athletes of like, there's a time where everyone knows you're done.
Yeah.
But how do you tell them that?
Yeah. And it's the smart ones that get, like Mayweather's a good example. Mayweather got out. He's got his brain cells. He's fine, and he's kind of the anti-Ali in the way that he fought. Hands always up, defense at top level. And so you wonder if he'll come back, but why? I mean, you've got your money, you're set. No need to come back. But you're right. Some athletes just have to play to the last possible moment. And it's unfortunate because we as a society have to watch them deteriorate, and that's one of the things that we just have to accept. And these are warriors for a reason, because their ego does not let them leave when they should,
Well, and this is why, why Ali, it will always be, I think, one of those fascinating stories. Because it's filled with what if. It's filled with reversals.
Yeah.
It's filled with the overcoming of obstacles. And it's filled with a personality which in the end is not comprehensible.
Yeah.
I mean, an amazing personality who's charismatic and fascinating, but sort of you go, okay, like what would it like to be hanging out with Muhammad Ali?
Right.
Would you get the real him? And I don't know that you do.
That's a good point. I do want to say one last thing with this film. One of the things that I love about the entire film is that it really gives you the perspective of what's going on in the country as well, with Mobutu, with what had been there before, with the regime change, what the viciousness of his regime, what it was like, the blood on the floor of the stadium, like all these kinds. So you get this vibe, throughout the whole documentary is this uncomfortable vibe of danger throughout the whole documentary. And you see that, and I think what it does really well though is highlights both fighters' reactions to what they're involved in. You see Ali, who's having his camp, who's doing his things, but he's talking. It's the old school Ali all over again, doing these things. And you see Foreman as more of the quieter approach, more of the kind of figuring out, not doing what he's doing here, as a young man would. A young man doesn't have the old man's approach to it. And then you see what occurs throughout the film, and then you see how this Mobutu leader, how he ran his country and how stringent it was, but understanding that they had to make the money, even with the delays and what have you. Then you talk about the concert, you talk about all these things. What's so great about the filmmakers, and they need to be lauded for this, and you spoke at the beginning, Steve, you said it was probably the only film that ever comes close to matching the legacy of Ali, to respecting and really hitting the levels of Ali. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the deft craftsmanship of the film to get you immediately into understanding the vibe and the atmosphere of what we're dealing with in the film.
It's really remarkable because when you think about all the things they're juggling and having made documentaries, I know that you have to do this. Is you go, okay, I want to talk. This is so important. I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about this. And I'm sure there are things that they ended up not being able to include.
Oh yeah,
but they strike this remarkable balance between the sense of coming to Africa and the experience of Africa, but balancing that out with this is what the government of that country was like at the time. And they have the sense of this amazing event that's being created, but balancing that out with Don King, who is another figure that is complex and, we're going to feel a lot of different things about them, and balancing them out with the music, and balancing them out with the civil rights movement, and balancing that out with the Nation of Islam, and balancing them out with a real deft analysis of boxing. And they do all of that simultaneously in a fairly short documentary.
Yeah, and the two moments that stick out for me that they kept in the film, which I love, at the end of the fight, Bundini Brown crying as he sees Ali, because Bundini himself, his greatest friend at the time, believed that he didn't have a shot. Deep inside, because you don't cry like that unless you are so happy your friend survived and you are amazed that he won. And they have that shot that is in the Ali movie, but when King tries to talk to Ali and Ali says something to his ear, you see King's smile immediately disappear from his face. That's a real life moment that they captured in the documentary, and I was like, yes, it's so great to see that, because you see it dramatized, you want to see the original footage.
Absolutely. So I hope you've enjoyed our little trip into the world of boxing.
Yes,
a little bit different for the Cine-Files, but I also think that I'm really glad we got to do our first documentary, because there's so much to talk about in documentary. Such a difficult art form.
Yes,
and to be able to do it with the great Muhammad Ali is a real treat.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts?
No, just if you haven't seen this movie and you've listened to this podcast, I hope we've whet your appetite to watch it. There's really no spoilers if you have any history of knowledge of Ali, but go back and revisit it after we've talked about it too, and enjoy it, and leave us your thoughts and comments and what have you, because this is a film that can speak to so many generations, and it speaks about more than just boxing, and I think that's important.
Absolutely, and I think in a way it could be an intro. It can be your gateway drug into the exploration both of the man Muhammad Ali and the world of boxing, but also of this era, because maybe this film leads you to watch Malcolm X, or maybe this film leads you to watch a great documentary about the Black Panthers, whose name just went out of my
on PBS, the one that was just coming on PBS.
There's so much information that comes together and culminates within this moment in time that's definitely worth you beginning exploring.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's it for this week. John, where can they reach you?
You guys can always find me at The Rocha Says. That's ROCHA. It's my homage to The Rock. You can see all the shows I'm hosting or co-hosting, like this show, or the shows I'm a guest on throughout the time at my Collider or Screen Junkies or what have you. Just follow me there, Instagram and Twitter.
I would like to follow you on all the shows in which you're coasting. Were you coasting today?
No, I'm not coasting.
You can reach me at SR Morris on Twitter. And of course, please visit our Facebook page at the Cine-Files, and where we would love to hear your thoughts on this film. I'm sure you can tell us where we got it wrong. And we'd also love to hear your suggestions for future films. All right, so that's it for this week. We'll see you next week on the Cine-Files.